Yes. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I guess I'm starting. I would give a spiel, but I don't think we have time, so I'm gonna do it. I'm Kel Willen. As it was introduced, I'm focusing on Axumite coins, and yeah, modern knowledge of the Axumite Empire owes much to the field of numismatics, the study of currency. The physical properties, weight, variances, linguistic changes, and production variations of Axumite coins are well documented. However, overall shifts in the field of African art history have challenged typical conventions and made room for re-examination. The level of Axumite prosperity under Izana, as well as the statewide religious conversion, made the 4th century emperor's coinage a fit specimen for deeper analysis, beyond just that of physical type. Looking to Corey J. Ellithorpe's 2017 scholarship regarding coin variation as a conscious instrument of propaganda in the Roman world brings new life to King Izana's coinage. Izana's currency is the centerpiece of an intentional and politically fluent propaganda program enacted to legitimate power and transmit the empire's spreading influence. The coin of focus was minted between 340 and 400 CE in Axum. For reference, the diameter of the gold coin is about 3.7 centimeters and it weighs 1.4 grams. So not this size. Both sides of the coin contain a half-length bust portrait of King Izana within an inner beaded circle, surrounded on the outside by Greek lettering with 2 crosses at the top and bottom pole. The obverse side of the coin shows the right-facing figure wearing an arcaded crown and a round-necked overgarment. The figure is flanked by 2 large stalks of grain. The inscription on this side is translated by the British Museum to say, King Izana. The reverse side follows the same general composition with a few exceptions. A closely fitted cloth head covering replaces the arcaded crown, and the Greek inscription reads, of Axumites, man of Allen. The reference to Izana's familial or tribal affiliation, emphasizing his role specifically as king of Axum. Before further exploring ideological messaging and the propagandistic potential of the titular gold coin, background about the Axumite Empire is probably needed by everyone to provide a context for deeper analysis. The Axumite Empire rose to power in northeastern Africa around the 1st century CE. The area's geography, as well as access to the Nile Valley and Red Sea, allowed for a flourishing empire capable of international trade to develop. The empire's extensive system of continental land routes facilitated an export economy of luxury goods such as obsidian, ivory, and rhinoceros horns. The main port city of Agilis became a linchpin east-west connection for the Greco-Indian trade route. The Axum Empire had commercial connections with the Mediterranean world, the Indian subcontinent, and South Arabia. With this prosperous trade came the need for the ease of standardized currency, which was first minted under King Endubis in 2070 CE. Politically, the development of the Axumite Empire was basically the unification of clashing city-states in northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. One king of kings stood at the head of a stratified feudal hierarchy of smaller kings and local rulers. The royal court was peripatetic, meaning they traveled from place to place, staying only for relatively short periods of time. The presence of the emperor's power was required to legitimate his rule, wage military campaigns, and gather taxes and tributes from vassal kingdoms. As mentioned earlier, Izana's reign brought greater military interaction with neighboring kingdoms such as Meroe, and also marked the empire's conversion to Christianity in the 330 CE. Clearly, there was a lot going on in a quickly growing kingdom with internal and external communication needs. So where do the coins come Izana used coinage to serve as a mobile medium of politically persuasive communication. On a base level, the emperor's bust portrait served as a symbol of his presence and authority. The coin serves as propaganda reinforcing Izana's rule. For example, the wheat surrounding the portrait on both sides serves to closely identify the image of the ruler with agriculture, with the nourishment of his people, therefore tying the wealth of the land with the king's power and a subliminal guarantee of Izana's reign to be positive and bountiful. Even if the court was not in the area, portable symbols of royal authority were at hand. In this light, the cross imagery being added to a widely disseminated object as further intentional political messaging, as shown in the original gold versus the silver. The Axumite coins were actually the first coin ever to have a Christian cross on it. The cross is added intentional political messaging. The cross is shown in the image of the coin, replaced the crescent and star icon on the silver coins and previous iterations of the gold. The cross takes up minimal space on the small gold coin, yet the addition sends a strong message to all who saw the new icon. In an empire with tough and varied terrain, the smaller portable coins served as a convenient way to spread ideas and news of the conversion. Likewise, the same symbol served a different message of connection with the Christian world on a greater political stage. Axumite currency was generally minted in bronze, silver, and gold. Due to fine spot trends, among other supports, the bronze and silver coins are generally held to be created for local distribution, while the gold coins are generally regarded as produced for external use. Gold coins tended to contain only Greek inscriptions, the lingua franca of the trading world, whereas bronze and silver also included Gez, the local Semitic language. Further examination of the differing inscriptions throughout Izana's reign is shown in.
All right. Today I'm going to be speaking about how those in power write history and how this concept is prevalent in ancient Roman times with the reign of the infamous Emperor Nero. When he took power in 54 CE, the emperor was initially supported by the Senate, mostly due to the influence of his mother and his advisors. By his forced suicide in 68 CE, the emperor was deeply controversial with the elite, and his death would also mark the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The image of Nero as a tyrant was shaped by those who opposed him, and was further reinforced by the succeeding Flavian dynasty. The Flavians used depictions of a cruel ruler to justify their leadership. The written accounts of Nero were by Roman historians long after his death, giving us a version of events that reflect the elite bias. The primary textual sources can be challenged by the material evidence left by the ancients, and most notably with coins. Recent scholarship presents a more nuanced view, challenging traditional narratives and requiring a closer look at Nero, his coins, achievements, and political interests that reveal a different story. The substantial production of coinage under Nero provides insight on his attempts to appeal to the common people over the elite, and reflects his interest in popular approval through a carefully crafted public image. Much like our modern coins, there is a front and a back, an obverse and a reverse. The front of the coins of ancient Rome displayed a portrait of the current ruler, while the back featured a variety of symbols often relating to military victories, gods and goddesses, or commemorations. Looking at a selection of the immense coinage produced under Nero, we can see a different version of the emperor, one who sought the approval of the common people rather than the elite. Marked by the influence of his mother, Agrippina, and his advisors, who were primarily in control for the first few years of his reign, Nero's rule was controlled by those who were favored by the Senate. But the death of his mother marked a turning point in this relationship. Looking to the first coins issued, they displayed both Agrippina and Nero. These portraits depict the close connection and portray them as equals. The tail side holds a Senate seal, suggesting under outside influence there was no animosity from the Senate. However, once Nero allegedly murders his mother, there's a dramatic shift and eventually the loss of the Senate seal. This signals the emperor falling out of favor with the senatorial class. The portraiture of Nero diverged from the traditional portraiture typical to the dynasty after his mother died in 59 CE. His portrait changed from the idealized youthful appearance to have a plumpness with an artificial coiffure deemed as inappropriate for Roman males. We see him gain a thick neck, double chin, and occasionally a beard that noted his indulgence in the pleasures of life. The new style of portrait would also have promoted ideas of luxury and leisure. These ideas were not favorable to the Roman elite, as they saw a good citizen as a good soldier. Around this time, Nero began to make radical changes in his fields of interest, particularly in athletics and the arts. He competed in Roman games, participated in acting and singing, played instruments, most famously the lyre, and wrote poetry. He associated himself with several gods, but most frequently with god Apollo. Ancient historian Cassius Dio even remarks on the triumphal crowd calling Hail to Nero Apollo. Coins issued by Nero depicted Apollo as a lyre player, reinforcing divine association. To further this association, he created a festival, Neronia, dedicated to Apollo, holding theater, games, and chariot races. Another ancient historian, Tacitus, noted that this was seen as a festival for degenerates as viewed from the upper classes of Roman society. The traditionalists of society saw athletics as dishonorable, as they were not true fighters. He sought the applause and the favorability of the people, and through imagery on his coinage, he was able to communicate directly. Compared to his predecessors, Nero significantly increased coin production, suggesting his desire to communicate and connect with the common people. Nero created 622 types, while his predecessors issued no more than 300 combined. One of the most common messages depicted was that of military peace, as he did not share the same ambition to expand the empire that the previous emperors held. This was also a major goal of the Senate. The personification of victory appeared 65 times, which can suggest peace as a consequence of victory. Though many coins glorified Rome, late coinage referenced military peace through the imagery of the Arch of Janus. No other emperor depicted this thus far. When the temple is open, it notes a time of war in Rome. On the coins issued by Nero, it can be seen with the doors closed as a symbol of peace. However, the idea of a peaceful military was not seen in any of the literature. The Flavian dynasty played a significant role in tarnishing Nero's reputation. After he died in 68 CE, the Flavian dynasty that followed the Julio-Claudian dynasty destroyed or reworked much of his artwork and buildings, which alters the way that we see the ruler. The emperors of the Flavian dynasty returned to Augustinian models of portraiture. This would work in their favor of creating unity between the dynasties, while also establishing legitimacy. Their push for the negative view of Nero helped ensure their reign, but in turn, the strategy also tarnished the reputation of Nero drastically. This is all to say that those who are recording the reception of Nero were also his internal enemies. The legacy of the emperor may not be how the common people thought of him. While there is no way to prove that they loved him, we can see the steps that he made to communicate and please them. His love for the athletics and arts was greater than his loyalties to the Senate and the elite. This is clearly shown by the disregard of what an emperor should or shouldn't do or appear like. We see the evidence of the ideology shifting through the changing style of portraits, the implementation of peaceful iconography, and his connection with Apollo, who was associated with music and poetry. He worked to make himself like them as he participated in the games. He consistently worked for their support and approval and sought acceptance through the people and their applause, not the elite or the Senate. The elite opposed his efforts to have a peaceful reign, but this may not have been opposed by the people. While we cannot know of the target audience's reactions, we can understand why the elite opposed him and why the following dynasty worked to create a negative light.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Riccio, and I will be presenting Damnatio Memoriae and the reuse of artwork from a tyrannical emperor. In 1937, a discovery was made in Rome when two ancient Roman relief panels were found in the tomb of Aulus Hieronymus. These two reliefs, titled the Cancelleria reliefs, due to their finding underneath the Palazzo della Cancelleria, provided scholars with a rare and fascinating depiction of the Roman Emperor Domitian, who ruled from 81 to 96 CE. The first frieze shows Domitian being led towards battle by the gods Victory, Mars, and Minerva. Frieze B shows Domitian with his father and predecessor Vespasian, with Vespasian greeting his son after Domitian returns from war. This discovery was extremely important in the study of ancient Roman art, since few artworks of Domitian remain because he was a victim of the act of damnatio memoriae. Damnatio memoriae, translated from Latin, means the condemnation of memory. It is a modern term used to describe the practice in the ancient world of systematically erasing a person from recorded history and art. In ancient Rome, this was often done by the Senate to erase the memory of an emperor who was deemed tyrannical. Despite our understanding of damnatio memoriae being to erase, there is still plenty of art and documentation of these emperors. A lot of works of these emperors survive because, rather than being destroyed, they were reused by a new emperor. The Cancelleria reliefs show that this is done not to erase the idea of an emperor, but to recontextualize these works of art in a way that benefits the succeeding emperor and Roman Senate. To understand the Romans' usage of damnatio memoriae, we have to look at its history outside of ancient Rome. Some of the earliest recorded examples of trying to erase the memory of a ruler through art and historical documentation come from Egypt. There are many sculptures that either have damage done to the face or the name scratched out of the inscription as a means of erasing their image and memory from history. This practice was linked to their religion. They believed in the afterlife being connected directly to the mortal world, which is why it was so important for them to build elaborate tombs and provide offerings to the dead. For the Egyptians, a person existed in the afterlife so long as they were being cared for and remembered in the mortal world. This is why the destruction of an image and artwork was so damning. Without record of a name or a face to keep the memory of a person alive, the soul would also cease to exist. The ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled from the 14th century BCE, was subjected to this damnation. In the New Kingdom period, he attempted to turn away from the standard polytheistic religion to a monotheistic one, despite this idea being an unpopular one with the Egyptian people. After his death, they worked to destroy his name and image from art and historical record. This sarcophagus from ancient Egypt is believed to be Akhenaten's, but it is not clear because of the intense damage done to the face seen here. Other works of art that depict Akhenaten are few and far between, and most only survive due to chance. For some Egyptian works, it is completely unclear who the art is meant to depict, meaning it is likely that these people of history's memories have been truly erased. The case for ancient Rome is a different one. Emperor Nero was another emperor that the Roman Senate tried to erase. As we can see in this bust of him, the nose has been damaged, making the means of identifying much more difficult, as a nose is a very defining feature in portraiture. Gaius is another example of an emperor who, like Domitian, was damned after being defeated by a succeeding emperor. However, none of these emperors have been completely erased from historical record, and in fact, there are many texts that tell the history of their ruling. Stories from Suetonius and Pliny the Younger give detailed descriptions of how they ruled the Roman people and the reasons why they were labeled as tyrants. The ancient Romans were very intentional about keeping history documented and recorded, even in difficult times, which makes it hard to understand why they would employ a method like damnatio memoriae. Returning to the Cancelleria reliefs gives us a better understanding of what these acts of destruction meant for ancient Rome. When these reliefs were discovered, a detail of relief A quickly stood out to scholars. Where Domitian's head had been was instead the head of Emperor Nerva, and it was clear that it had been carved over Domitian's head because the head was very small compared to his neck and the heads of the gods around him. Nerva was the emperor who directly succeeded Domitian after defeating him in 96 CE. And there were several works of art like this one that had his face carved over Domitian's. But why would an emperor want to reuse the artwork of someone who was labeled as a tyrant? One possibility that is the easiest to come to terms with is that the reuse of artwork meant that you did not need to require those materials elsewhere, making it cost efficient. This was no doubt a likely benefit of reusing these works. However, it is important to point out that during the 1st and 2nd century CE, marble supply was booming in Rome, and there was no shortage of the material. It was used all throughout the emperor with little consideration, as marble works could be found in public spaces, in the furniture of private homes, and in large monuments such as the Ara Pacis, commissioned by Emperor Augustus just under a century before these reliefs. Considering the awkward proportions of the portrait of Nerva, it could have been easier to create a new piece altogether. On top of this, there was no reason for Nerva to have an image of him going off to war, because at no point during his reign did he go to war. So why would they not just create a new piece of artwork? Why would Nerva want to carve his face over a tyrant who is believed to go to war needlessly, when the outcome of these reliefs would so clearly show that his face was where something else once was? Lauren H. Peterson has argued that the act of damnatio memoriae does not erase, but instead contradictorily recalls what is not there. Like a sponge chalkboard, it may appear empty, but it is obvious that at one point there was something there that had been erased. It is my belief that the Roman Senate and the emperors who committed these acts of damnatio memoriae did so intentionally, not to erase, but to remind and rewrite. A brand new sculptural relief of Nerva would not tell the same story as the one that has his face carved over the tyrant that he overthrew. The former subject matter and the action of reworking a piece go hand in hand with each other to create a whole new layer of meaning to a work. In the case of the Cancelleria reliefs, Domitian had created these images of himself as a just military leader. Rather than rushing off into battle, he is showing hesitation, despite the gods who approve of this war and are trying to guide him towards it. Nerva recarving himself over Domitian's image is not him trying to reuse the narrative with his own face on it. By destroying Domitian's image and putting himself over it, he is stating that Domitian failed to live up to this idea. It also serves as a promise to the Roman people that he would do better than his predecessor and only go into battle with good reason. Damnatio memoriae in ancient Rome does not hold the same meaning that it did in ancient Egypt, where its intention truly was to eradicate a name and face from history. It was instead a political move, used by the Roman emperors and Senate to condemn the actions of a tyrannical emperor and promise to the people to do better. Thank you.
Is there a place for problematic art in museum spaces? Paul Gauguin's 1893 painting titled Marahi Metua no Teamana, roughly translated to Teamana has many parents, or the ancestors of Teamana, presents a compelling response to this question. While Gauguin has historically been regarded as an esteemed post-impressionist artist, today's standards would classify him as a sexual predator. Despite its problematic nature, this painting and the rest of his oeuvre have been highly valorized in the past and even today for his contributions to art history. An analysis of this painting yields important dialogue surrounding conversations of sociological methodologies, feminist perspectives, as well as anthropological considerations, and subsequently provides a valuable critique that helps us use the negative actions of artists of the past to improve the art of the future. This piece currently resides in the Art Institute of Chicago, and despite the problematic nature of the artist, the AIC does little to nothing to address these issues. Nowhere in the description do they explain the predatory relationship between the artist and his model, but rather it focuses on the symbolism found within the piece, all of which ignore vital pieces of context regarding the artist and the subject. Consequently, we are not able to engage in the fruitful dialogue regarding this painting in a critical fashion. Gauguin's time in Tahiti was clearly one of the most influential moments in his life and in his career as an artist. In understanding this painting, it is also important to understand what brought him to the place in which it was conceived. A sociological perspective is helpful when looking at Marahi Metua no Teamana because it provides critical context that helps position it in time and place. It is thought that, to an extent, a portion of Gauguin's interest in primitivism was derived from his travels during his youth. However, that being said, it is also known that Gauguin desired an escape from what he considered the pollution of modern capitalism and industrialization that was rampant in Europe during the late 1800s. Gauguin arrived in Papeete with many simplistic preconceptions of what Tahiti would be like, that were governed by a strict demarcation between civilization, which consisted of the impure European, and primitivism, which consisted of the pure indigenous peoples. However, this perspective was derived from a concept known as the imaginary Tahiti. The West first encountered Tahiti in 1767, leading to the first missionary expeditions, which occurred only 30 years later. By 1842, it became a French protectorate, and by the time of its annexation in 1880, all local traditions, beliefs, and practices had been banned. This colonial ban came as a considerable shock to Gauguin, as he expected to be met upon arrival by the noble savage and the exotic Eve. However, he was rather disappointed to learn that by this time, Tahiti's capital was completely governed by his fellow French nationals, from whom he had been attempting to flee from. Determined to encounter primitive life, he was quickly moved towards the outskirts of the island to the village of Matia, where they were said to still engage in traditional Tahitian practices. However, once he arrived, it seemed as though even there, little remained of the indigenous culture. Although, that being said, the Tahitians of Matia did manage to preserve their language, traditional subsistence economy, and family-centered social organization. This is also where he met Teamana of Marahi Matua no Teamana, perhaps his first Tahitian muse. Due to the subject matter of this painting, it is important to engage in a discussion regarding an analysis of the painting using a feminist lens, a perspective not often considered in scholarship regarding painting. This image depicts a 13-year-old girl said to be one of Gauguin's young Tahitian lovers, named Teamana. During his time in Tahiti, he painted primarily portraits of Tahitian women, the majority of which were depicted either fully or partially nude, wearing a traditional cultural garb, like, for example, in Gauguin's famous image, Day of the God. Teamana, however, sits in modern European missionary dress, which conceals nearly all of her body. In this image, she also bears frangipani flowers in her hair, which are thought to be symbolic of both purity and innocence, as well as eternal love. She also has red flowers in her hair, which are thought to signify her sexual availability. The scene behind her also includes what the AIC refers to as various non-European glyphs derived from an Easter Island tablet, as well as a female deity inspired by Polynesian and Hindu sources. Additionally, the fan held by Teamana was perhaps included with explicit intention due to the fact that the shape and style of the fan are indicative of Samoan heritage, furthermore believed to be a marker of rank and noble lineage in the South Pacific. Teamana is cited as being an important figure in Gauguin's life, therefore making her identity an essential point of reference when it comes to the manner in which she was portrayed in this particular painting. Much of what we know about Teamana can be gleaned from Gauguin's semi-fictionalized account and pseudo-ethnographic attempts from his first trip to Tahiti, which lasted from 1891 to 1893, titled Noa Noa, Voyage de Tahiti. In Gauguin's first draft of the manuscript, he tells a story of how he came to meet Teamana while traveling to the village of Fahon. He describes how, after meeting and conversing with many of her family members, he was allowed to take the young girl back to his home in Matia. An anthropological analysis of this painting is also important because Gauguin is not only depicting real women like the ones seen behind me, but he also, as a French artist, attempts to illustrate aspects of a culture from which he did not belong. His genuine interest in Tahitian culture therefore led him to take an ethnographic approach to his art, and particularly to his depictions of the indigenous culture of which he was studying. However, that being said, though Gauguin had a thirst for knowledge when it came to the Tahitian culture, his research was problematic in the sense that the majority of his sources of information were derived from the works of European writers, such as the outdated and unreliable travel guide titled Trips to the Great Ocean Islands from 1837, written by Jacques-Antoine Morinhout. It is argued that the artist's colonial sources of knowledge, as well as his flamboyant and often narcissistic character, deteriorated the credibility of his ethnographic endeavors. It is also believed that this behavioral trait was often also translated through his art. as while in Tahiti, he would often title his works in the indigenous language despite having very little grasp of it, causing his translations to be mysterious in nature, possibly indicating an attempt at a deeper meaning in his work where perhaps there was none. By consistently combining aspects of different exotic cultures, Gauguin built within his art a generic sense of foreignness and mystery. This self-serving attitude also prevented him entirely from cultivating an accurate depiction of the culture he wished to immerse himself in. Because Marahi Matua no Te Amana is currently on display and will likely continue to be on display into the future, there is much that can be done to rectify the situation. Museums such as the Art Institute of Chicago must take the lead on matters such as these, and it all starts with how it is displayed. A re-examination of the label for Marahi Matua no Te Amana is necessary for an accurate and appropriate description of the painting. Acknowledging its troubling history opens the painting up for a more illuminating interpretation that lends itself to a deeper understanding of the significance of the piece within art history as a discipline that can only come with the additional context. While I understand the struggle to include vast amounts of information on a single label, a complete lack of recognition of the problematic nature of the artist and the subject of the painting is irresponsible and unethical, as it glosses over important misconduct that warrants discussion and reconciliation. Part of this rapprochement comes with the education of the public. Increasing awareness of the faults of the artist and the art and artists of the past allows us to approach the future with the knowledge needed to improve and right some wrongs. Thank you.
At first glance up at the Moulin Rouge, the viewer's eye is immediately drawn to the lime green face on the right edge, framed by the busy background of one of Paris's most storied nightclub. The face belongs to English dancer May Milton, whose presence led an art dealer to cut her from the painting at one point, possibly to make it easier to sell, only for her to be reattached over 2 decades later. Among the background figures is the artist himself, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. Though often overlooked, Toulouse-Lautrec's presence is in fact one of the most crucial features of the work. This essay lays a sociological framework to explore how contemporary research in gender and disability studies repaints at the Moulin Rouge not merely as a depiction of 19th century Parisian nightlife, but as a nuanced self-portrait of the artist himself, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, and his struggle to navigate his identity as an outsider. Toulouse-Lautrec's fascinating family history is key to understanding his artistic output. His family, a southern French aristocratic dynasty, maintained their generational wealth through decades of intermarriage. This would lead to the congenital bone disorder Henri was born with in 1864. This disorder, along with an incident where he broke his leg, forced Toulouse-Lautrec into a sedentary life. He turned to art as a reprieve, discovering his life's passion. He would learn to walk with the aid of a cane, but at just 5'1", he remained physically limited, living in pain for much of his life. By young adulthood, Toulouse-Lautrec received familial support to pursue art professionally and moved to Paris by 1882, where he studied under Léon Bonnat, a popular teacher painter. Despite his aristocratic background, Toulouse-Lautrec felt alienated in Paris and found refuge in the Parisian neighborhood of Montmartre. Known as an epicenter of artistic creativity, underground culture, and liberal attitudes, Montmartre thrived during this vibrant period. Beginning in 1885, Toulouse-Lautrec spent the next 15 years living in complete déclassé, much of it at the cabaret, the Moulin Rouge. Opening the same year, the 1889 Universal Exposition and the completion of the Eiffel Tower, Moulin Rouge became a space where cultural, sexual, and artistic boundaries were tested, where sex workers and aristocrats coexisted. At the Moulin Rouge is a massive canvas at 123 by 141 centimeters, allowing Toulouse-Lautrec to depict a variety of the cabaret's most notorious characters. In the corner of the room, a group is seated near the windows, including Edouard Dujardin, the dancer La Macarena, photographers Paul Sacow and Maurice Goubert, and Jane Avril, recognizable from behind by her distinctive red hair. Avril gazes towards another group behind her, featuring Mademoiselle Nelly, Dr. Tafi de Saint-Laurent, Toulouse-Lautrec's cousin, and standing alongside them, Toulouse-Lautrec himself. Finally, May Milton gazes hauntingly from the right foreground. Formal analysis informed by disability and gender context reveals that Moulin Rouge's intense use of composition and color offers viewers an intimate portrayal of Toulouse-Lautrec's perspective on the group's dynamics and themes of isolation. Understanding Toulouse-Lautrec's disability reveals how his limitations translated
to the composition and themes of At the Moulin Rouge. Modern diagnoses confirm that Toulouse-Lautrec was afflicted with a rare genetic disorder characterized by short stature, fragile bones, a large skull, short distal phalanges, and what doctors described as open fontanelles of the sort that might be hidden under a bowler hat. This debilitating disorder significantly impacted Toulouse-Lautrec's mental health, a struggle reflected in his letters to friends and family, where he frequently referred to himself disparagingly in the third person, foreshadowing his later tendency to bury himself in the background of his works. Toulouse-Lautrec's feelings of physical and emotional inadequacy are mirrored in the vantage point and composition of At the Moulin Rouge. Despite his presence in the scene, its figures are portrayed from Toulouse-Lautrec's own eye level, directly aligning with May Milton's gaze. Historians suggest that this perspective intentionally reflects his physical and psychological viewpoint shaped by his disability. Furthermore, the viewer stands behind a receding diagonal wooden banister that sharply cuts across the canvas at a 45-degree angle. This empty section of the painting is intentional, serving as an additional inner frame that directs the viewer's perspective inward towards the otherwise obscure focal point, Toulouse-Lautrec himself. Additionally, many figures are cropped at the waist, representing the fragmented way he perceived both himself and others. Toulouse-Lautrec's At the Moulin Rouge takes place during a turbulent time in French history, marked by intensifying debates over women's economic and political rights. Understanding Toulouse-Lautrec's work through the lens of gender studies is crucial, as he actively documents these societal changes, capturing women in various roles, from waitresses to sex workers. Deviating from other artists of his era, Toulouse-Lautrec's depictions of women were described as psychological portrayals. Cora Michael, an art historian at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, describes Toulouse-Lautrec's 1897 Woman Before a Mirror by stating, "Lautrec presents her neither as a moralizing symbol nor a romantic heroine, but rather as a flesh and blood woman, as capable of joy and sadness as anyone." Toulouse-Lautrec's outsider status, shaped by his physical disability and mental health struggles, likely heightened his sensitivity, allowing him to create nuanced portrayals of marginalized figures. Furthermore, it allowed him to craft entire scenes that reflected the psychological states of both the figures he depicted and his own inner world. At the Moulin Rouge is an emotionally charged scene that unmistakably reflects Toulouse-Lautrec's own turmoil. The painting features hurried brushwork, a technique known as peinture au sens, mirroring Toulouse-Lautrec's sense of instability within his inner and physical world. The color application at the Moulin Rouge is intensely expressive, symbolizing various themes of isolation and outsider status. The painting is composed primarily of thin oil paint, resulting in rich yet subtle variations of dark violets and browns. This creates a dark muted effect that dominates the scene, particularly in the table group, floor, walls, and furniture. These deep tones contrast sharply with the club's lights and mirrors, the reddish hues of Jane Avril's hair, the pale skin of the women, and most strikingly, the neon-lit face of May Milton. Art historians suggest that Avril's red-orange hair contrasts with Milton's lime-green face as a commentary on their romantic relationship. Homophobia may have led to Milton's removal from the work, while Toulouse-Lautrec's inclusion of their outsider relationship reflects his connection to marginalized figures. Broadly, the painting's neon hues have been seen as an enduring symbol of the intense, vividly colored nightlife scene of Montmartre. However, new analyses suggest that the eerie green glow on May Milton's face reflects Toulouse-Lautrec's perception of outsiders in this setting, demonstrating his own sense of isolation due to his disability. The stark contrast between Milton's cool green complexion and the warm background hues heightens the work's psychological tension, emphasizing the character's struggle with belonging even within the familiar setting of the Moulin Rouge. The era in which At the Moulin Rouge was created marked the peak of Toulouse-Lautrec's artistic success, just before his 1899 hospitalization for delirium tremens, a condition resulting from chronic alcoholism. This condition, along with neurological complications from syphilis, ultimately led to his death at 36 years old in 1901. To study At the Moulin Rouge solely as an icon of Parisian nightlife would be to overlook the profound personal struggle that shaped Toulouse-Lautrec's work. Through the lens of modern scholarship, this painting transcends its depiction of the era's vibrant social scene and opens a window into the artist's private world, deeply influenced by his disability and the era's struggle with gender. Through this analysis, At the Moulin Rouge is revealed as a powerful self-portrait, offering insight into Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec's experience as an outsider in 19th century France.
Thank you so much, Ren, and to all our speakers in the first section. If you will all come up, you may notice that we're running a little behind, so you'll have to just give us a little grace here. But if I could have the first 5 speakers come up here, we're gonna make a little bit of time to ask questions. I'm thinking we'll get at least, if we could get at least 1 question for each of our speakers, that would be wonderful. And then we'll take a very, very short break, and then we'll come back for the second half. So do we have any questions for these wonderful speakers? Yes, anybody can ask. The floor is open.
Kind of for both Trinity and Kel, how were the coins minted? Like, were they stamped or how were they made?
I mean,
Team answer.
I'm sure it was similar technology, but there was a recent find of axamite dies. There's more in Rome, but they were probably clay. They were previously carved and pour the metal in and stamp it. Yes.
For Emily, what does the museum tag actually say for the piece that you were?
I referenced a couple, or quoted it a couple times, but a lot of it refers to a lot of the background material, what's behind him on a, specifically when I talked about the flowers in her hair, they referenced kind of the ambiguous nature to a lot of like the titling, and he used a lot of, he combined different cultures, like kind of like the Western and the Tahitian cultures. So things that he would have been seeing while he was in France, the pictures that I showed of the real women, he would have been seeing pictures like that, and that's kind of what he was traveling to Tahiti to find. So he used a lot of European texts and travel logs that were not necessarily kind of viewing the Tahitian culture from the outside, and didn't utilize anthropology as we kind of see it today and ethnography as we see it today, where it's more interactive with the culture. So it was more of observations. So to kind of answer your question, specifically kind of symbols within the piece, specifically like the Hindu god, which kind of combines, different Polynesian sources and also Hindu. So he did a lot of hodgepodge within his art, and he showed interest in the culture, but not interest deep enough to kind of, learn from the actual individuals of the culture. It was a lot of, he went into Tahiti with these preconceived notions, and he knew what he wanted to find, and he wasn't going in with an open mind, wanting to learn, I think, genuinely about the culture, but he wanted to immerse himself in something that he thought was exotic and wasn't really representative of the time.
I have a question for Alex Switcho. So you showed us an example where an emperor's head had been recarved. And sometimes I've seen examples where an emperor's head will be completely erased. And I'm wondering if there are like different approaches to dealing with the undesirable emperor, have different messages.
Yeah, there's certainly like plenty of examples that show like either method, and I think they sort of both have their own purposes, but both of them show that there is something that was once there that is no longer there. I think that the full-on erasure and like elimination, I'm trying to think of that one example. It's the painted one. I can't think. Yes, the circle. I know you know.
I can't think of any.
I know you know. Where that is a very clear, like, erasing and like showing that you are against this person and that you want other people to see that. Whereas the sort of like reworking and recarving can sort of take the context that that was in and use it in a new context. Such as like with my example where it was not only saying he was not a just military leader, but I will be.
For Renee, when you, the portrait of Lautrec that I received was a very isolationist figure. And I'm thinking of authors like the Inkling Group that typically come along as a group, collaborate with each other, motivate each other. Who were some of his contemporaries that he might have also been inspired by or inspired?
He was really inspired by Degas, which I found interesting. Originally I wanted to frame this as like his exploitative view of women, and then I took a look into Degas' work and I was like, contemporarily. He was good. He also he drew a lot from Japanese woodblocks, which is really interesting, and you can see that in his bold use of color mostly. But yeah, no, and he wasn't afraid to kind of declare his inspiration, which I enjoyed to learn about.
Thank you.
This is for Trinity. I really liked how you started with a tobacco card of Nero fiddling while Rome burns. And I had no idea that Nero had so many interests in the arts and wanted to project certain, an aspects of him. Do you think Nero has been unfairly treated by history?
He's definitely done bad things also. He pretty much did murder his mother and executed his first wife. So like he doesn't do great things, but he did a lot of things for the common people. And he introduced a lot of different schools and a lot of education that they didn't have before. So I think he's gotten a little bit too harsh of a reputation, but he definitely deserves some of the
I have a kind of a global question for all of you from somebody out there in our live stream. And this person asks, what do you think the art you talked about today can say about our modern world? I know that's a big question, but if anybody has an immediate thought, please speak up.
I have something to say. I feel like we, as the Western world, are still stuck in this conception of even contemporary African art, or really, like, our conception of the continent is one that is not interconnected, it's sparse, it is primitive or behind. And I just really, what interested me about my topic so much, for out of a million reasons, was just that this wonderful empire that is so technologically advanced and taking so many steps to purposefully compete at a global stage on a level that very few other empires at the time could match up to. Like, why is our messaging, even for modern day, not on the same level, let alone why don't we acknowledge past accomplishments that like colonial archaeology might have covered up or credited to.
Right. Well, I think I thank you so much to our speakers. I think I'm gonna. Anybody who has subsequent questions to address the speaker, maybe during a very brief 5-minute break, I suggest you stretch or grab a little water or what have you, but we're going to reconvene at 6:45 for the second half. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Spencer, and this is my presentation. Okay, so between 1933 and 1945, an estimated 600,000 works of art were appropriated, stolen, or went missing at the hands of the Nazis. The Nazis confiscated artworks largely for two reasons. Either the subject matter was deemed degenerate and not compatible with the ideas of the Nazi Party, or the artwork belonged to a Jewish owner and was confiscated to strip them of any property. Artworks confiscated by the Nazis during their rise and height of power in the 1930s and 40s remain the subject of intense debate in the art world. Governments and museum governing bodies have enacted various guidelines as reactions to Nazi confiscated objects within museums. An examination of these cases is crucial to how we in the future will deal with claims over them. I will investigate the case of Egon Schiele's Russian war prisoner at the Art Institute of Chicago as a Nazi confiscated artwork to argue for greater access to object provenance records and transparency within museum collections. Egon Schiele, born in 1890 and died in 1918, was an Austrian expressionist painter who created more than 2,000 drawings and watercolors. Schiele's Russian war prisoner, created in 1916, is a watercolor painting that is overlaid on a graphite sketch that depicts a Russian prisoner of war. The story of the painting begins when Schiele was assigned to guard duty in Atzger near Vienna, Austria, where Russian prisoners of war were held during World War I. As he had done when guarding prisoners in 1915, Schiele took the opportunity to draw the prisoners under his guard. The prisoner in Schiele's work is depicted with a sense of despair and is not some faceless adversary. Peering into the history of the painting following Schiele's death in 1918, it is noted that Russian war prisoner was acquired by Fritz Grunbaum, here on the left, an Austrian Jewish cabaret performer through Vienna's Neue Gallery at a one-man show of Schiele's work in 1923. The painting, along with 20 other of Grunbaum's Schiele artworks, later appeared on loan at an exhibition at Werther Gallery in Vienna from December 1925 through January of 1926. Grunbaum's ownership of the painting and other Schiele works was further documented in correspondences with Otto Clear, here on the right, for a memorial exhibition commemorating the 10th anniversary of Schiele's death in Vienna in October through November of 1928. In July of 1938, Grunbaum's collection was confiscated by the Nazis while he was imprisoned at Dachau concentration camp in southern Germany. He was forced to sign the Dachau Power of Attorney, which authorized his wife Elizabeth to liquidate his assets and hand them over to the Nazi regime. As part of the process of securing Jewish assets, the Jewish Property Transaction Office of Vienna commissioned the Nazi Franz Keislinger to inventory Grunbaum's art collection while Grunbaum was in Dachau. Grunbaum's art collection contained at least 80 Egon Schiele, of which Russian war prisoner was likely included. Many of the Schiele works, originally owned by Grunbaum, reappeared in the hands of Eberhard Kornfeld, an art dealer in Switzerland, following the signed off on the collection to her sister Matilda Lukács sometime before Elizabeth died in 1942 at the Mali-Trostenetz extermination camp. Lukács is thought to have then sold the paintings to Kornfeld. However, Kornfeld most likely received the paintings through a relationship with Cornelius Gurlitt, son of Hitler's personal art curator, Hildebrand Gurlitt, who was the Nazis had deemed as degenerate art. It's important to note that Kornfeld is known to have faked Lukács' signatures on many of the documents related to the paintings. In 1956, Kornfeld offered 54 Schiele artworks for sale at Günterkunst in Klipstein, where a Russian war prisoner was among 19 other Schiele works that Otto Clear later purchased from the sale for the New York City-based Galerie Saint-Etienne. The artwork then transferred hands through private collectors before being acquired by the Art Institute in 1966, where the painting remains to this day. Authorities from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York attempted the seizure of the painting in 2023 with evidence of the Nazis' confiscation. The artwork was purchased by the Art Institute in 1966 for roughly $5,500 at the time and is now worth nearly $1.25 million. The Art Institute feigns that they acquired the artwork in good faith and refuses to return it. In a related case, the Museum of Modern Art returned both Standing Girl and Girl Putting on Shoe to Grunbaum's heirs after acknowledging the evidence that the paintings were illicitly confiscated by the Nazis. Therefore, it is bizarre for the museum to stand firm in refusing to return or resolve the claim regarding Russian war prisoner, especially given that the painting is not on view at the museum. The claim that the Art Institute makes in regards to being a good faith purchaser is undercut by their inability to properly acknowledge that the painting had at one point been in the hands of the Nazis. The unrelenting nature of the Art Institute regarding Sheila's Russian war prisoner appears to be an outlier between larger institutions and their responses to Nazi confiscated artworks. The Museum of Modern Art, for example, has a document listing nearly 1,000 artworks created before 1946 and acquired after 1932 that were or could have been in continental Europe during the Nazi era. The Art Institute, on the other hand, does not make note if an artwork falls under similar criteria. The American Alliance of Museums Standards on Nazi Confiscated Artworks directly state that museums should document their research into Nazi-era provenance of objects in their collections. They also state that if a museum is found to have an unlawfully appropriated artwork that has not been restituted, they should make that information public, of which they do not. Furthermore, many of the Art Institute's records are only available within the libraries in their Michigan Avenue building. As a result, it makes it more difficult to access the records if one is not in the vicinity of the museum. Combined with the lack of hours available to research within the libraries, it appears they do not seem to be the most accessible in terms of conducting provenance research. The Art Institute fails to reasonably make this information public, not only for the case of Russian war prisoner, but for the myriad of works in the collections that might possibly be Nazi confiscated artworks. Given their response, it would not be surprising if they deliberately concealed provenance information to retain prominent objects within their collection. It is not surprising that the issue of Nazi confiscated art still needs to be discussed and will continue to be discussed as pertinent to the future of museums. Museums should not be able to argue the moral high ground in these cases if they acquired the artwork without conducting proper provenance research or if they deliberately conceal aspects of an artwork's provenance. However, it seems the bigger issue is the less than stable legal foundation, which caused bigger arguments over object ownership. The conflation of morality with a quote-unquote just and fair solution only creates legal loopholes for museums and individuals to exploit when instances of Nazi confiscated art appear. Stable legal foundations have to be fashioned instead of justifying an object's return based on supposed moral principles that provide neither a just nor fair solution for the original owners or heirs. Considering that it has taken well over 80 years for some of these artworks to be returned, it appears that we presently won't have an answer to the problem of Nazi.
One of the most consequential movements in art history, Berlin Dada emerged in 1918 in response to the political and social turmoil following World War I. The movement included artists such as Richard Holdenbeck, George Grosz, John Hartfield, Raoul Hausmann, and importantly, Hannah Hoch. The Berlin Dadaists embraced anti-authoritarian anarchist stances, using cabaret performances, noise concerts, poetry readings, and media hoaxes to spread their ideas. Photo collage or photo montage became the movement's signature medium. The terms photo collage and photo montage are often used interchangeably, however, they differ in technique. Photo collage is the physical cutting and pasting of elements onto a single surface, often creating jagged edges and a disjointed aesthetic. Photo montage, on the other hand, strives for the seamless integration of all the elements. Although Hoch's work is frequently labeled as photo montage, her work more closely aligns with the photo collage aesthetic, emphasizing fragmentation and juxtaposition. This new art form allowed for individuality and freedom, core tenets of Dadaism. While Hausmann and Hoch are co-credited with the creation of photo collage, Hoch's work uniquely critiqued gender roles and societal norms. Historically, artistic movements have largely been male-dominated, with women relegated to roles as muses or assistants, rather than recognized as artists in their own right. This patriarchal practice has obscured the contributions of countless female artists. However, careful research often reveals that women have contributed greatly to shaping these movements. One such artist is Hannah Hoch. While Hoch is often referenced in connection to her turbulent relationship with fellow Dadaist Raoul Hausmann, she is a revolutionary figure in her own right, using photo collage to critique the patriarchal structures of Weimar society. Born Anna Therese Joanne Hoch in Gotha, Germany on November 1st, 1889, Hoch was the eldest of 5 children. Familial obligations interrupted her education at age 15 when she was pulled out of school to care for her younger sister. It wasn't until 1910 that Hoch could continue her studies at the School of Applied Arts in Berlin-Charlottenburg, where she focused on glass design. The outbreak of World War I disrupted her education once again, but the experience profoundly shaped her political and social consciousness. Hoch returned to Berlin to study graphic arts at the School of the Royal Museum of Applied Arts. She balanced her artistic pursuits with a publishing job at a prominent publishing house in Berlin from 1916 to 1926. The outbreak of World War I had immense effects on Hannah Hoch's political consciousness. As a young woman with a bourgeois background, this new world of prejudice, injustice, and violence was a rude awakening. However, it informed much of her artistic creations and activism throughout her career. One work that encapsulates this activism is Cut with the Dada Kitchen Knife Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch in Germany. Created in 1919, this photo collage shows Hoch's intense political views and her exceptional artistic talent. Commonly considered Hoch's masterpiece, she cleverly uses the title to describe the process of making a collage, likening it to a crude form of surgery. The patient, in this case, is the collective body of the nation from whose beer belly Hoch is taking a sample. In other words, Hoch strove to create a chaotic piece that served as a visual cross-section of German culture in 1919. In addition, the beer belly refers to the bloated and decadent nature of the Weimar government and its bourgeois class. Hoch dives into anti-nationalist and anti-military beliefs as well as depicting figures such as Kaiser Wilhelm II, generals, admirals, and even Vladimir Lenin in various states of obscenity and disfiguration. Finally, Hoch's arrangement of photographs from all sources makes the work difficult to comprehend and unsettles the viewer. This is a direct relation of the tumultuous nature of Weimar during a period marked by political unrest, economic instability, and social upheaval. In addition, using a new medium reflects the disillusionment with traditional pre-war values from which the Dada movement rose. Participating in the Berlin Dada movement gave Hoch's activism a platform that many other women of the period did not have. Hoch shrewdly used it to critique gender roles and limitations within the Weimar Republic. One issue she took on was the controversy about decriminalizing abortion in the Republic, which is reflected in her work Mother. This collage was a part of a series of approximately 17 photo collages made between 1924 and 1930, titled From an Ethnographic Museum. Although this series technically falls outside the Berlin Dada period, Hoch still uses Dada methods and resources to communicate her message. The central figure of Hoch's collage is a female torso onto whom a disproportionately large mask-like head has been pasted. This mask leaves a gap in the woman's mouth and includes two mismatched eyes. By distorting and obscuring the woman's face, Hoch pulls the viewer's focus to the figure's torso, which ultimately conveys her message. The female torso is a cutout of a picture of a working-class woman taken by John Hartfield, a fellow Berlin Dada visual artist. In Hartfield's original photograph, the full upper part of the woman's body is seen, and she cradles her belly, making it clear that she is pregnant. Behind her lies the corpse of a child soldier. When first published, the caption on the picture read, "Forced producer of human material." The Dada Little magazine, defined as a small, independent, non-commercial periodical aligned with the avant-garde, first occurred as a named genre in the early 20th century, just a few years after the establishment of the Dada movement. Formed largely in protest during World War I and concentrated in New York, Paris, and Berlin, this movement was an anti-establishment one, fueled by experimental and satirical artworks. As the Dada movement grew, little magazines quickly developed into the main form of communication and popular expression for the Dadas. But communication was far from their only purpose. One cannot discuss the popularization of little magazines without discussing the rapid rise of full print magazines that took place concurrently. While magazines as a commercial print medium had existed for some time, it took until the early 20th century for the magazine to become widely accessible. Magazines quickly became the most prominent medium for use by advertising companies, and advertisements often filled nearly 50% of a magazine's total page space, visible here on the right. The magazine itself was a commodified object, and for this reason, caught the attention of the Dadas as a new manipulatable medium. I argue that Dada little magazines perform dual roles in this movement, as both forms of communication and art pieces in their own right, proving them one of the most impactful forms of Dada art that subsequently acted as the basis for the development of the contemporary art form known as zines. One of the main tenets and purposes of the Little magazine was its use in communication for both between international groups and to wider publics. It was through Little magazines that Dada was coined and philosophically developed.
Without little magazines, Dada as a cohesive movement could not have developed due to the widespread of its contributors. Tristan Tzara was the first individual to publish the word Dada alongside the movement's manifesto in his little magazine of the same name, seen here. Through titling his magazine Dada, Tzara formally invented the movement by physically bringing the art, writing, and ideas from different places and people together into one cumulative piece. As mentioned, the Dadaists were interested in interacting with the advertisement industry, and their repeated use of the little magazine speaks to it as a method of advertising the movement itself. A key example of the little magazine as a literal advertising method can be found in the New York single edition little magazine, The Blind Man, which was made with the principal purpose of publicizing the Society of Independent Artists 1917 exhibition. The Dadaists utilized little magazines to spread the word about their art and larger movement, particularly in cities where political goals were at the forefront of their work, like in Berlin. In the interwar period, little magazines acted as an important method of resistance for progressives and leftists in Germany. For example, the formal political party, known as the Dadaist Central Union for World Revolution, was founded through a manifesto included in a little magazine. However, the purpose of little magazines did not begin and end with this relation to communication and advertising. Instead, they also acted as standalone art. The little magazines required a significant amount of artistically oriented work, even when literary text took up the most real estate, a phenomenon illustrated well by magazines 291 and 391, in which small photos, drawings, and/or graphics intertwine with the text. Little magazines were also thoroughly collaborative from start to finish. While some magazines may have had just one editor or publisher, all of them include works from multiple artists or writers, which reflects principles practiced in all different mediums within the Dada style. In contrast to many previous influential art movements, Dada and its little magazines questioned the notion of single authorship. The Dada movement not only allowed, but encouraged various forms of collaboration. The act of combining individual ideas and works into a single little magazine fell upon its editor. And while I consider each contributor to the magazine one of its artists, the editor curates the piece in the way that one would curate an exhibit. Beyond just curator, the editor also acts as designer. And considering the movement's strong relations with typography, the editor was also just as much an artist as those contributing pieces to the magazine. Dada typography developed a distinct sense of style through its use in a variety of mediums, but the use of typography in the little magazine allowed for significant amount of artistic experimentation, visible in magazines like Der Dada, Mers, and 291. Furthermore, Marcel Duchamp himself, a founding and iconic member of the Dada movement, framed New York Dada, a magazine he edited, as a work of art by placing it in his box in a valise alongside replicas of his other works. Duchamp's inclusion of the little magazine in his compilation piece implies his own consideration of the magazine as a work of art. Additionally, little magazines align with Hannah Hoch's invention of the artistic form of photo collage, which Michaela so kindly explained and from having to say the title of that piece. Der Dada 3 here well represents this idea. Not only is the cover of Der Dada 3 an actual photo collage, but the magazine itself acts as a collective photo collage. It places together art and writing from a variety of Dada hubs. Such a diverse assemblage of works placed in one cohesive document, meant to be experienced together in this way, reflects the same mentality behind photo collage, where each piece is transformed to create a new whole. This then affirms that each little magazine was its own unique piece of art. The avant-garde nature of the little magazine kept them at the forefront of many progressive political and artistic movements beyond Dada's time, and ultimately led to the development of zines. Zines are non-commercial, homemade, or online publications usually devoted to specialized and unconventional subject matters. Zines became an outlet for social and political movements where social actors could, as the Dadaists did in little magazines, express and communicate their beliefs while experimenting with and displaying their art. While oftentimes scholars have most strongly related contemporary zines with the early science fiction fanzines of the 1930s, not only did little magazines predate the fanzine, but contemporary zine culture aligns much more pertinently with the tradition of the Dada little magazine. Contemporary zine culture tends to be inherently political, but politics are almost always paired with art. In the fall 1990 edition of Struggle, a self-proclaimed zine of proletarian revolutionary literature found in DePaul's archives, The experimental typeface on the cover calls back to Zara's early experiments with typography. Inside, the zine contains not only manifestos and essays, but poetry, often paired with manipulated images. In the 1990s, the Riot Girl movement applied zine making directly to feminist theory and practice. In their zines, Riot Girls published manifestos, art, poetry, and more, all under the chosen theme of each individual magazine. Zines like these created a subset community. While Dada was anti-art, Riot Girl was anti-punk, punk. When examining zines made in the past few years, Dada visual influence stands out, particularly through the aforementioned elements of collage and experimental typography. Simultaneously, we can see many creative innovations, including new sculptural presentations, highlighted in the zine at the top right, that continue to push this art form into the category of the avant-garde. The Dadaists, as early manipulators of new media, set the stage for the development of the magazine as an artistic medium in itself. Dadaists used these little magazines with such strategic purpose that it changed the perception of their movement. And without them, we would likely not discuss Dada as the aggregate movement we recognize it as today. Little magazines not only represent the best of Dada collective strategy and political action, but they also represent the best of Dada art. These little magazines brought together the most impactful and innovative works from each city, time, and individual to create intensely collaborative artistic collages that have left a lasting impact upon art history and popular culture, most visible through the zines of today. Thank you.
So, hi. I don't know where the camera is. Okay. As Mexico and its capital developed in the decades following the Mexican Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, so too did its architecture. The Mexican Revolution caused massive political upheaval at the time and also brought with it social and cultural change. Mexico was being rebuilt, and Mexico City was the center of multiple architectural movements happening at once. Mexico City has long been a center of a nation with rich culture, with it being the indigenous home of the Aztecs under the name Tenochtitlan. Many architects took it upon themselves to aid in the mission towards advancements in Mexico City through its architecture. One such architect was Juan O'Gorman, with what he is arguably most famous for, the Central Library at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, otherwise known as UNAM. The Central Library at UNAM was the answer to the question of how to make both a modern and Mexican building. Juan O'Gorman created this with his team as an example of modern Mexican architecture that references the rich history of Mexico City with its mosaics featuring indigenous motifs. The architecture of Mexico City reflected the change of the Mexican Revolution after 1920 with a shift towards modernism, a sentiment that went deeper than just the new style of buildings. Functionalism, an architectural style that emphasizes the practicality of design, was the style sought after by the government in the 1930s. O'Gorman was no stranger to this style, as he had designed buildings in the past that adhered to the characteristics of functionalism. Although the government had mostly stabilized 10 years after the revolution, rebuilding had only just gotten started. Functionalism allowed for public buildings to be constructed inexpensively, as they were bare-bones structures with only the necessities, which meant the cost would be significantly lower than other options. However, there was massive corruption in Mexico City's building sphere at the time, with developers cheapening the projects in an attempt to make the most possible profit. O'Gorman believed that this went against the very foundation of functionalism, the idea that it is available for a wide amount of the population. He also found that it did not adapt to Mexico's identity. He wanted to see and create an idea of Mexico's modern look of architecture while continuing to honor the indigenous legacy of the space. This belief led to what became the decorations of the Central Library. O'Gorman wanted to design a modern Mexican image without erasing the rich indigenous past, and he achieved this with the Central Library with the entire design itself. His mural mosaics recall ancient media and designs while still being on an example of modern architecture with its simple rectangular form and materials used of concrete and steel. The Central Library opened in 1952 with the rest of the Ciudad Universitaria with the partnership of Juan O'Gorman, Gustavo Saavedra, and Juan Martinez de Velasco. The Ciudad Universitaria was a new national university located near the ancient lava fields of El Pedregal and was emphasizing education for its students heading towards the future and wanted to demonstrate this notion with the iconography of the Central Library. It's complete with a mural mosaic titled Representación Historia de la Cultura, or Historic Representation of the Culture. The mural mosaic covers all four walls of the building, totaling 4,000 square meters, and is made with native rocks and minerals from different states of Mexico. Each wall is devoted to different periods in Mexico's history and lightens the heaviness of the otherwise block-shaped building. O'Gorman used the technique of plastic integration to combine the elements he felt needed to be present in modern Mexican architecture. Plastic integration was meant to bring the visual arts and architecture together, an idea that took rise in the mid-20th century by three other modern Mexican architects, Carlos Obregón Santa Cecilia, Mario Pani, and Enrique Yanez. This plastic integration
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Riccio, and I will be presenting Damnatio Memoriae and the reuse of artwork from a tyrannical emperor. In 1937, a discovery was made in Rome when two ancient Roman relief panels were found in the tomb of Aulus Spiritus. These two reliefs, titled the Cancelleria reliefs, due to their finding underneath the Palazzo della Cancelleria, provided scholars with a rare and fascinating depiction of the Roman Emperor Domitian, who ruled from 81 to 96 CE. The first frieze A, shows Domitian being led towards battle by the gods Victory, Mars, and Minerva. Frieze B shows Domitian with his father and predecessor Vespasian, with Vespasian greeting his son after Domitian returns from war. This discovery was extremely important in the study of ancient Roman art, since few artworks of Domitian remain because he was a victim of the act of damnatio memoriae. Damnatio memoriae, translated from Latin, means the condemnation of memory. It is a modern term used to describe the practice in the ancient world of systematically erasing a person from recorded history and art. In ancient Rome, this was often done by the Senate to erase the memory of an emperor who was deemed tyrannical. Despite our understanding of damnatio memoriae being to erase, there is still plenty of art and documentation of these emperors. A lot of works of these emperors survive because, rather than being destroyed, they were reused by a new emperor. The Cancelleria reliefs show that this is done not to erase the idea of an emperor, but to recontextualize these works of art in a way that benefits the succeeding emperor and Roman Senate. To understand the Romans' usage of damnatio memoriae, we have to look at its history outside of ancient Rome. Some of the earliest recorded examples of trying to erase the memory of a ruler through art and historical documentation come from Egypt. There are many sculptures that either have damage done to the face or the name scratched out of the inscription as a means of erasing their image and memory from history. This practice was linked to their religion. They believed in the afterlife being connected directly to the mortal world, which is why it was so important for them to build elaborate tombs and provide offerings to the dead. For the Egyptians, a person existed in the afterlife so long as they were being cared for and remembered in the mortal world. This is why the destruction of an image and artwork was so damning. Without record of a name or a face to keep the memory of a person alive, the soul would also cease to exist. The ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled from the 14th century BCE, was subjected to this damnation. In the New Kingdom period, he attempted to turn away from the standard polytheistic religion to a monotheistic one, despite this idea being an unpopular one with the Egyptian people. After his death, they worked to destroy his name and image from art and historical record. This sarcophagus from ancient Egypt is believed to be Akhenaten's, but it is not clear because of the intense damage done to the face seen here. Other works of art that depict Akhenaten are few and far between, and most only survive due to chance. For some Egyptian works, it is completely unclear who the art is meant to depict, meaning it is likely that these people of history's memories have been truly erased. The case for ancient Rome is a different one. Emperor Nero was another emperor that the Roman Senate tried to erase. As we can see in this bust of him, the nose has been damaged, making the means of identifying much more difficult, as a nose is a very defining feature in portraiture. Gaius is another example of an emperor who, like Domitian, was damned after being defeated by a succeeding emperor. However, none of these emperors have been completely erased from historical record, and in fact, there are many texts that tell the history of their ruling. Stories from Suetonius and Pliny the Younger give detailed descriptions of how they ruled the Roman people and the reasons why they were labeled as tyrants. The ancient Romans were very intentional about keeping history documented and recorded, even in difficult times, which makes it hard to understand why they would employ a method like damnatio memoriae. Returning to the Cancelleria reliefs gives us a better understanding of what these acts of destruction meant for ancient Rome. When these reliefs were discovered, a detail of relief A quickly stood out to scholars. Where Domitian's head had been was instead the head of Emperor Nerva, and it was clear that it had been carved over Domitian's head because the head was very small compared to his neck and the heads of the gods around him. Nerva was the emperor who directly succeeded Domitian after defeating him in 96 CE. And there were several works of art like this one that had his face carved over Domitian's. But why would an emperor want to reuse the artwork of someone who was labeled as a tyrant? One possibility that is the easiest to come to terms with is that the reuse of artwork meant that you did not need to require those materials elsewhere, making it cost efficient. This was no doubt a likely benefit of reusing these works. However, it is important to point out that during the 1st and 2nd century CE, marble supply was booming in Rome, and there was no shortage of the material. It was used all throughout the emperor with little consideration, as marble works could be found in public spaces, in the furniture of private homes, and in large monuments such as the Arapagus, commissioned by Emperor Augustus just under a century before these reliefs. Considering the awkward proportions of the portrait of Nerva, it could have been easier to create a new piece altogether. On top of this, there was no reason for Nerva to have an image of him going off to war, because at no point during his reign did he go to war. So why would they not just create a new piece of artwork? Why would Nerva want to carve his face over a tyrant who is believed to go to war needlessly, when the outcome of these reliefs would so clearly show that his face was where something else once was? Lauren H. Peterson has argued that the act of damnatio memoriae does not erase, but instead contradictorily recalls what is not there. Like a sponge chalkboard, it may appear empty, but it is obvious that at one point there was something there that had been erased. It is my belief that the Roman Senate and the emperors who committed these acts of damnatio memoriae did so intentionally, not to erase, but to remind and rewrite. A brand new sculptural relief of Nerva would not tell the same story as the one that has his face carved over the tyrant that he overthrew. The former subject matter and the action of reworking a piece go hand in hand with each other to create a whole new layer of meaning to a work. In the case of the Cancelleria reliefs, Domitian had created these images of himself as a just military leader. Rather than rushing off into battle, he is showing hesitation, despite the gods who approve of this war and are trying to guide him towards it. Nerva recarving himself over Domitian's image is not him trying to reuse the narrative with his own face on it. By destroying Domitian's image and putting himself over it, he is stating that Domitian failed to live up to this idea. It also serves as a promise to the Roman people that he would do better than his predecessor and only go into battle with good reason. Damnatio memoriae in ancient Rome does not hold the same meaning that it did in ancient Egypt, where its intention truly was to eradicate a name and face from history. It was instead a political move, used by the Roman emperors and Senate to condemn the actions of a tyrannical emperor and promise to the people to do better. Thank you.
Of the mythological Aztec goddess of the moon, who was murdered by her brother in the primal Aztec origin story. Her femicide was fossilized for centuries in the monumental Aztec sculpture pictured here that was rediscovered in 1978 near Tarsisio's Mexico City studio. The modern Coyolxauhqui is a temporary manhole cover recycled from a job site like the one where the Aztec stone was found. Tarsisio uses its smaller scale to interrupt the Coyolxauhqui myth, as he renders her body whole and life-sized and lays her to rest atop wood warmed to a glowing gold, then gifts her a shadow of humanity. Though she is naked, like her predecessor, Tarsisio's Coyolxauhqui is freed from the bounds of her mythology, from the headdress, the accessories, and the motifs that denote her divinity, becoming mortal and thus liberated, a myth broken. Like the Aztec subjects that bore witness to the original Coyolxauhqui, Neo-Mexican artists were born under an oppressive government. Their childhoods were marked by the 1968 Tlatelolco student massacre, where the military executed 300 student protesters and stripped, beat, and imprisoned many more. The trauma affected the nation for decades and was compounded by the 1982 economic crash and the 1985 earthquake that reduced Mexico City to rubble. The resulting disenfranchised view of self would create a fissure in which neo-Mexicanists could shade in feelings of loss and desires for legitimacy. The neo-Mexicanists joined a long tradition of artists that worked in themes of Mexican identity, like the famous early 20th century Mexican School, a national indigenous-themed art movement led by Diego Rivera and largely dictated by the federal government. Although it was anti-colonial, it was centered on the Aztec and erased the history of other indigenous groups of Mexico. In the generation after the Mexican School, the rupture happens. Led by Jose Luis Cuevas, where artists rejected the Mexican School's folkloric themes and focused on universal international style. These artists lived in a globally connected world, one that would not last, as Mexico began what historian Enrique Krauss notes as the decline of the system, which would culminate in the disasters of the 1980s. I'm missing my last paper. No, oh my God.
Could it be in your bag here?
Yes. So sorry, guys. I can wait. Is not. The neo-Mexicanists, in order to survive the failed state of Mexico, find laughter in the midst of chaos, with their antagonistic appropriations of patriotism. More abstract and minimalistic than most artists of the movement, Tarcissio's economy and rendition does not detract from meaning, but underlines Aztec themes of death, regeneration, and the use of blood as a conduit to communicate with gods and godlike power structures. Tarcissio's metaphor of falling, fallen empires, fallen victims of violence, fallen hope for modern Mexico, is put into words in his 1985 poem, The Man Who Falls, which is about a man who throughout epics continuously falls into the same temptations of war, destruction, and power. The lines of this poem can be applied throughout Mexican history, from the Aztecs to the conquistadors to the modern state. Themes of government and oppression endure countless evolutions of the calendar. In criticizing these themes, Tarcisio did not eclipse his Mexican identity, but proposed a narrative shift across space and time to interrupt the idealization of the troubled past.
Don't go though. Come on up. But everybody who was in part two, we're going to take a few minutes and a few questions. Thank you so much for those amazing papers. Honestly, all of you did such a nice job. And I would love to open up the floor to any questions. Yes, Liz.
My question is for Vanessa. I'm curious, does any of the interiors of the Central Library get to continue any of those motifs? Did Thurman have a chance, or a collaborator of his get to collaborate at all, like on the interior design at all?
It's not like particularly fun. No hate, it's just the inside is basically just like a normal university library. So it's
It's a missed opportunity, honestly.
like every picture I saw was just like stacks of books. There's no hate to books, but like there's just like a window,
Thank you, I was really curious.
Yes.
I'm almost afraid to ask, but Amanda, who is it the artist's blood?
No, so
That was all of our first questions.
he lived he lived near the Zocalo in the center of Mexico City, so it's a very industrial neighborhood, and he found a butcher that would give him like giant black trash bags full of blood, and he would carry them down the street.
Amazing. Yes.
For Spencer, what does it matter if they acquired the art in good faith? Isn't it still stolen at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the central debates, especially in the legal case regarding the painting. Because both Austrian law, where the painting was originally stolen, as well as some of the argument with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is under like New York law and stuff like that, no good title can be derived from something that is stolen. However, some of the argument is that whether or not the DOCA power of attorney was something that was forced upon the collector. And so as a result, the Art Institute can basically argue that they did acquire it in good faith, and they can also say, negate some of the arguments of the provenance of the painting to basically be like, we're not going to return the painting.
Yes. A quick little double question for Emily. How do they disseminate the little magazines, and do they have kind of the like same DIY spirit that zines are considered with today?
Yes. So the second question. Nice. First question. So it was like similar to how zines are distributed today, like very localized, but they would also be mailed out. So that was kind of where the international thing came together. Like they would sometimes with the blind man, where it was an advertisement, that they would also like mail to different members of the Dada group, essentially acting as like an invitation to the exhibit. But otherwise they would be distributed at like Dada gatherings and events, places like the Cabaret Voltaire, which was their hangout spot. Yes, and the two was the second question. I answered it?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I have a question for Michaela. You mentioned that Hannah Hoke had been trained in glass design or had gone to school for a while in glass design. And I was just wondering if there's any way that that training ends up showing up in her photo collage or makes her photo collage different from other people's photo collage.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't read anything that specifies that there's a connection, but I'd assume the delicacy that's needed to work with glass, it would also need to be applied to collage to be able to cut out the little people and paste them exactly where you need them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was even just trying to think of what glass design looked like in the, first decade of the 20th century. So yeah, it's great, thanks.
I have a question for Spencer. Your paper was looking really at ethics of, museum ethics and provenance and so on. I'm wondering if there's an ethical question to be asked also about the creation of the work, that Sheila is depicting a prisoner of war under his control.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of like irony to it. I know in one of my drafts, I kind of said, from war this painting came, to war it went. And essentially there is that really yeah, I know, right? That there is some element of control that Sheila had over these prisoners. Something that was iterated in some of the scholarship on Sheila himself was that he often, spoke with the prisoners who had very similar ideas of like, they wanted peace as well, and that like the idea of a united Europe really appealed to them. And so to kind of have that, I think it was more that he depicted them in those conversations essentially.
Question?
I did, yes. For Amanda, I was so struck by how you framed the production, Narcissus production. Its content, subject matter. But I was so curious also if you had thoughts about the formal variety and stylistic variety, because it's kind of impressive how much one work is varies to the next.
Yeah, I think his His main focus is working in the historical mediums and working with the historical scale. When he takes Kolyol Shalpi from a monumental god that's 10 feet high to a life-sized woman with a shadow, he's trying to break those myths of violence and femicide and victimhood that came with the Aztec. And then when he takes Velasco's views of the Valley of Mexico, of which many hang in a prominent gallery in the National Art Museum in Mexico City, and he doubles the size, saying, no, this like pastoral scene is not the truth. The truth is we got here through the deaths and destruction of many cultures and people.
Well, that might be a not opportune note to end on. However, time is marching on, and we do have one more small set of things to do. Thank you so much to. I'm going to invite Dr. Mark Delancey, Chair of the History of Art and Architecture Department, up to the front to present, announce the paper prizes and to present some other.
Wow. Some great presentations, really great presentations. But I have the honor of bestowing a whole bunch of awards. First of all, an award recognizing our honored alumnus. I want to thank Thomas Edwards for returning to DePaul, coming back to us, sharing his rich experience with our students, providing them with an insight into what life might look like beyond our classrooms. That is how we put art history to work in the real world. So thank you, and we have a nice I also have the honor of bestowing awards, recognizing the hard work of our students. But first, I want to reiterate a few of the thanks that Delia expressed at the beginning, and a few more. First and foremost, I want to thank Professor Cosentino. Put so much effort into designing a course that'll challenge our students, enrich their educational experience, but also put together this event. This extends beyond the Capstone course alone. Coming at the end of their DePaul careers, if our students arrive at the point where they're ready to succeed in Capstone, it's because of our excellent faculty. So, and I can tell you, I'll soon be stepping down after 6 years as department chair, and I can tell you there's a great group of professors to work with. Not only are they top-notch scholars, but as Thomas suggested, they really care about their students and put their hearts fully into their teaching. And of course, none of the symposium would actually work if it weren't for our fabulous department assistant, Sarah Matthews. Our students also, of course, wouldn't be where they are without the support of their community. And so I think we need to honor parents, other family members, their friends. And now we recognize our students for their hard work, all the blood, sweat, and tears shed in getting to this point. So I'm going to call each of your names in alphabetical order. Receive your certificates for participation in this symposium. First, Trinity Baker. All right. Emily Bilsma. Amanda DeLeon. Michaela Durrell. Vanessa Gonzalez. Spencer Harrison. Emily Cook. Ren Senamore. Alex Richo. Kel Williams. Okay, and last but not least, I get to present the awards for our annual paper prizes for papers written over the past year at the 200 level, the 300 level, and for the capstone. So at the 200 level, for a paper written for Professor Mahoney's course, HA 232, Age of Cathedrals, we honor Light in the Dark Ages, written by Eloise Lyons. We'll have to get her paper later.
Yes.
But it's a beautifully written paper that explores how medieval European art and architecture employed light and reflective surfaces as an allegory for the presence of God. At the 300 level, for a paper written for my course, 301 African Architecture, we honor the essay Niamey 2000 Housing Project and the Modern Housing Complex in Africa, written by Emily Bilsman. In her very original paper, Emily explored the ways in which architect Mariam Issoufou sought to address the low-income housing shortage in her home city of Niamey, Niger, by combining environmentally conscious modern materials and design with a respect for local cultural necessities. And then finally, the capstone paper. The winner of this prize will also have the honor of representing our department by publishing their essay in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences undergraduate research journal, Creating Knowledge. I don't have to describe the paper because, just heard all the papers, or at least shortened versions of. So the winner of this year's Capstone Paper Prize is the paper written for Professor Mahoney's course, HA 320, Art and Power in Pagan and Early Christian Rome, is Alex Richo. And that concludes everything.
this symposium, but as you all know, we have a reception waiting for us outside. I'm sure we're all in need of nourishment, but I would like to just reiterate something that's on the back of your pamphlet, which is that we have the special honor of having received a donation from one of our own alumni, and that is Line Rao. I think you're here. There you are. Okay, Line's family owns Art History Brewing. So you might find yourself a thematic libation out there thanks to Line and their family. And I would also like to say you can find Art History Brewing beer in Binny's and where else?
Deal with Whole Foods.
Great. So So please remember to support Art History Brewing and please go enjoy yourself. Thank you all so much for being.